The Hartwell family stopped bleeding in the spring of 1845. Not stopped bleeding their livestock for medicine. Not stopped bleeding themselves when fever struck. They stopped bleeding entirely. When Dr. Edmund Marsh arrived at their cotton farm outside Camden, South Carolina on April 19th, he found something that shouldn't have been possible. 5 bodies. Not a single drop of blood left in any of them. But the soil around their house was black and wet for 30 yards in every direction. The first strange report came from a neighboring farmer named Jacob Winters. He wrote in his personal journal on March 28, 1845, about visiting the Hartwell property to discuss purchasing seed cotton. What he saw disturbed him enough that he never returned. Thomas Hartwell was in his south field at midday, Winters wrote. He was letting his own blood into a wooden bowl. Said the doctor told him to bleed once weekly for his constitution, but Thomas was filling that bowl near to the brim. His wife Sarah stood beside him with her sleeve rolled back, waiting her turn with the lancet. When I asked after their health, Thomas smiled and said they'd never felt stronger, said the land needed it. I thought he meant the blood for fertilizer, which struck me as peculiar but not impossible. The old-timers used to say blood strengthened tobacco soil, but then Thomas poured that bowl of his blood directly onto the ground at his feet. The dirt drank it down like a man dying of thirst. The Hartwells weren't wealthy planters. They worked 40 acres themselves with help from 2 hired hands, growing mostly cotton with some corn for their animals. Thomas was 38 years old. Sarah was 35. They had 3 children, Martha, age 14, James, age 11, and little Catherine, only 8 years old. By all accounts, they were an unremarkable farming family until that spring. A letter from Sarah Hartwell to her sister in Charleston, dated April 2, 1845, suggests the bloodletting started as normal medical treatment. The letter reads, "Dearest Elizabeth, Thomas has been suffering terrible headaches these past months. The pressure behind his eyes grew so fierce he could barely see to plow. I sent for Dr. Marsh from Camden. The doctor examined Thomas and said he suffered from an excess of blood. Too much pressure in the vessels, he said. The cure was to release it. Dr. Marsh opened a vein in Thomas's arm right there in our parlor, drew nearly a pint into his bleeding bowl. Thomas said he felt relief almost immediately. Dr. Marsh left us the lancet and instructions. He said Thomas should bleed himself once weekly until the headache ceased.
Subscribe to stay updated on what happened when the Hartwell family tried to stop the bleeding ritual they'd started."
Medical records from Dr. Edmund Marsh's practice journal provide additional context. In an entry dated February 12, 1845, Dr. Marsh noted, "Treated Thomas Hartwell, age 38, farmer. Patient complained of severe headaches, pressure behind eyes, difficulty concentrating. Upon examination, found pulse strong and rapid, face flushed. Diagnosis, plethoric condition, excess sanguine humor. Performed venesection, removed 16 fluid ounces of blood from median cubital vein. Patient reported immediate relief. Prescribed weekly bleeding for 1 month, not to exceed 10 ounces per treatment. Left patient with spring lancet and instruction on proper technique." Dr. Marsh's notes from that first treatment also included an observation he later found significant. Patient mentioned his property was formerly Catawba hunting ground. Said he sometimes felt he was being watched when working the south field. I attributed this to isolation and hard labor, common complaints among farmers working land alone. The Catawba connection appears in other documents as well. A letter from the previous property owner, deceased in 1843, mentioned strange occurrences on the land. His widow, Mrs. Elizabeth Morgan, wrote to her nephew in Charleston, "Your uncle always said there was something restless about that 40 acres. The Catawba had been gone 20 years when we purchased it, but James swore he sometimes heard voices in the evening, singing or chanting in a language he didn't know. Our dogs refused to enter the south field after dark. When we tried to plant there in 1840, half the seeds didn't sprout, and what did grow came up stunted and strange. James took sick that same year. The doctor said it was his heart, but James told me in his final days he thought the land was angry with him for something. He never said what. But something went wrong between February and late March. The hired hand, a man named Daniel Cooper, gave testimony to the county sheriff after the bodies were discovered. His account, recorded April 21, 1845, describes a troubling change in the family. "I worked the Hartwell place 3 days each week," Cooper stated. "Come late March, I noticed Mr. Hartwell bleeding himself out in the field instead of inside. He'd roll up his sleeve, open the vein, and let the blood run straight into the soil. First time I saw it, I asked if he was well. He told me the land had been speaking to him, said the soil was hungry, that it had been hungry since the Catawba Indians were pushed out 20 years prior. He said the land remembered blood, and that's what it wanted. I thought the sun had got to him, but then I seen Mrs. Hartwell doing the same thing, and then the children." The children. That detail appears in multiple accounts. Martha Hartwell's schoolteacher, Miss Agnes Pemberton, noted in her diary on April 5, 1845, "Martha Hartwell appeared pale and listless during lessons today. When I questioned her, she showed me marks on both arms, small cuts, precisely made, some fresh and some healing over. She said her father had been teaching her and her siblings the proper way to bleed, said it was important, that the land needed tending in ways most people didn't understand. I asked if she felt unwell from the bleeding. She assured me she felt wonderful. Said the farm had never been better, that the cotton was growing faster than her father had ever seen. I sent a note home with Martha expressing my concern. I received no reply." Miss Pemberton made a second entry 3 days later, on April 8th. "Martha did not attend school today. Her brother James came in her place. When I asked after his sister's health, he said she was home helping with the planting. James appeared even more concerning than Martha had. His complexion was gray, his movement slow, but he insisted he felt fine. Better than fine, he said. He told me his family had found the secret to making the land produce, that by next harvest, they would have the finest cotton in Camden. When I asked what secret he meant, he simply said, 'The land tells us what it needs. We just have to listen and give it.' I found his words deeply unsettling and again wrote to the Hartwell parents. This letter, like the first, went unanswered. The local minister, Reverend Samuel Pritchard, also attempted to visit the family during this period. His account, given to the sheriff after the deaths, describes a troubling encounter. "I called on the Hartwell family on April 12th, concerned by reports of their declining health and unusual behavior. Thomas met me at the door but did not invite me inside. He appeared gravely ill. His skin had a gray tinge, his eyes were sunken, yet he moved with a strange energy. I told him I'd heard concerning reports and wished to pray with the family. He thanked me but said prayer wouldn't be necessary, said they'd found their own way of communing with something greater than themselves. Those were his exact words. I asked if he meant God. He smiled and said, 'Something older.' I left disturbed and reported the matter to the church council, but we took no action. I have regretted that inaction every day since." Another neighbor, Mrs. Helen Crawford, encountered Sarah Hartwell at the general store in Camden on April 9th. Her account to the sheriff describes a woman who seemed to be wasting away. "Sarah looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 months, Mrs. Crawford recalled. She was thin as a rail, skin gray as ash, but her eyes were bright, almost feverish. When I commented on her appearance, she laughed and said she'd never felt more alive. Said they were cultivating something special on their farm, something that would change everything. She bought 4 extra lancets that day. Said the old one wasn't enough anymore. When I asked what she meant, she just smiled and said, 'The children need their own.'" The final documented visit to the Hartwell farm came from their neighbor Jacob Winters on April 15th, 4 days before the bodies were found. His journal entry describes a scene that made him fetch the sheriff immediately. "I rode past the Hartwell place on my way to Camden. What I saw made me stop cold. The cotton field nearest the house was growing like nothing I'd ever witnessed. The plant stood 4 feet tall already, thick as a man's wrist. This in mid-April, when most cotton was barely 6 inches high. But the color was wrong. The stalks were dark green, almost black. The soil around them looked wet, though we'd had no rain in a week. And there were birds. Dozens of black birds circling the house, but none would land. I saw Thomas in the field, pale as death, cutting his arm with a lancet. His blood ran down into the soil, and I swear I saw the cotton plants lean toward where it fell. I didn't go closer. I rode straight for the sheriff. Sheriff William Dumont's official report, dated April 19th, 1845, documents what he found when he arrived at the farm with Dr. Marsh and 2 deputies. We approached the Hartwell property at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning. The scene was immediately disturbing. A dark stain covered the ground in a rough circle around the dwelling house, extending approximately 30 yards in all directions. The soil was black and appeared wet. The cotton in the south field grew abnormally tall and dark. No livestock were visible, though the property was known to have 3 milk cows, several pigs, and chickens. The house was silent. We found the first body in the parlor. Thomas Hartwell lay on the floor beside the fireplace. His arms bore dozens of cutting marks, some old and scarred, others fresh. Dr. Marsh examined the body and found no blood remaining in it. Not from bleeding out, he said, but as though the blood had been drawn out entirely. Every vessel was empty. The body was cold, but had not yet begun to decompose, despite appearing to have been deceased for perhaps 2 days. We found Sarah Hartwell in the kitchen. Same condition. Martha and James were in their shared sleeping room upstairs. Young Catherine was found in the root cellar. All 5 showed the same signs. Multiple precise cuts on both arms, bodies completely drained of blood, but no blood present at the scene. The floors were clean. No pools, no stains, no blood on their clothing. Dr. Marsh examined the soil around the house. He said it felt cold and damp with an oily texture. When I asked what could cause such a thing, he had no answer. But he noted that the cotton plants growing in that blackened soil were unlike anything he'd seen. The stalks were thick, dark, and growing at an impossible rate. He cut one open. Inside, the fibers were red. Dr. Marsh's own medical report from that day provides additional disturbing details. I have practiced medicine for 20 years and witnessed many unusual deaths. I cannot explain what befell the Hartwell family. The bodies showed clear signs of repeated bloodletting over a period of weeks. But the volume of blood removed from 5 human bodies should have created a considerable amount of physical evidence. There was none. The wounds on their arms were made with precision, suggesting they performed the bloodletting themselves, willingly and methodically. Most disturbing was the condition of the youngest child, Catherine, aged 8 years. Her body bore the same marks as the others, suggesting she participated in the bleeding ritual of her own volition. Children that age do not willingly submit to repeated cutting unless compelled by deep belief or coercion. Yet no signs of physical restraint were present on any of the bodies. I took samples of the soil around the dwelling. Under examination, I found what appeared to be human blood mixed into the earth, but in quantities far exceeding what 5 bodies could provide. The soil had a peculiar odor, sweet and metallic, reminiscent of a slaughterhouse. Most troubling, when I placed a small amount of this soil in a glass container, it appeared to move. A subtle shifting, as though something within it remained active. I disposed of the sample in a fire. The property was abandoned after the bodies were discovered. The cotton crop was burned on the sheriff's order. One of his deputies, Marcus Webb, later told his family what he witnessed during the burning. His daughter recorded the account in 1889. Father said the cotton didn't burn like normal plants. When they set fire to that south field, the smoke came out black and thick. The smell made several men sick, and the stalks themselves seemed to resist the flame. They had to douse the field in lamp oil 3 times before it would catch properly. Father said when they finally got it burning hot, he heard sounds in the smoke, like voices crying out. But he never told anyone official because he thought they'd call him mad. The Hartwell house stood empty for 6 years. Several families attempted to purchase the property at auction, attracted by the low price. Each left before completing a sale. The land itself seemed wrong, they said. The soil remained black and damp, no matter the season. Nothing would grow in it except strange, twisted plants that died within days. The house was finally torn down in 1851. The lumber was salvaged for other buildings in Camden. Within 3 years, every structure built with wood from the Hartwell house experienced problems. The Turner family's barn, which used Hartwell lumber for the main support beams, became a place their animals refused to enter. John Collier's workshop, rebuilt with Hartwell floorboards, was the site of 3 accidents in 1 month. Each time, the workers reported feeling dizzy and seeing dark spots in their vision before falling or cutting themselves on tools. By 1854, every piece of lumber from the Hartwell house had been burned. The land itself was left fallow. The county records show it changed hands 17 times between 1851 and 1900, but no one ever worked it again. A particularly unsettling detail emerged in 1867 when a land surveyor named Charles Brennan was mapping property boundaries in the area. His field notes from July 12 describe what he found. Located the former Hartwell property by referencing the county maps. The boundaries were clear enough, though the land itself remains disturbed. The most peculiar discovery was in the location of the former dwelling house. The soil is still discolored, forming a perfect circle approximately 30 yards in diameter. I took measurements and found the center point to be precisely where the house's parlor would have been.
The same room where Thomas Hartwell's body was discovered in 1845.
I noticed movement in the soil near this center point. Upon closer inspection, I observed what appeared to be small plants pushing through. I excavated one and found it to be cotton. But the plant structure was all wrong. The roots were red instead of white. The stalk bled a dark fluid when cut. I left quickly and reported my findings to the county clerk. I was told to record the boundaries and make no mention of the cotton in the official survey. The former Hartwell property sits 7 miles outside Camden, South Carolina. The land has never been successfully farmed since 1845. Current property records list it as unbuildable wetland, despite being on elevated ground. Last month, researchers from the University of South Carolina took soil samples from the site as part of a study on agricultural practices in the antebellum South. 3 of the 4 researchers developed severe anemia within 2 weeks of handling the samples. The 4th reported vivid dreams of standing in a cotton field at night, cutting her arms with a knife she couldn't drop, while the soil beneath her feet whispered that it was still hungry. The soil samples are still in storage at the university. The lab technician who cataloged them noted in her report that the containers had to be moved 3 times because they kept sweating a dark red liquid that made the other samples deteriorate. The cotton seeds they found in those samples have started to germinate.